Welcome to the Magdalene Codes. I'm your host, Valeria Marie Tanini, and today's podcast is part 2 of David Sereda's interview, of which was cut off the last time. David Sereda's podcast is more about Mary Magdalene, experiencing her, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, and also all of his experiences with the Holy of Holies and sacred geometry. Please continue to listen, as this is a very moving podcast. And we're back with David Sereda. Welcome back, David.
Thank you, Val.
I'm excited to connect with you today because you say that it's your anniversary of having the vision of Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, and what's amazing, it's May 23rd today, so that would have been 3 years ago. At the time of the vision, which I'm going to go into today, I had no idea the significance of the date. It was a whole year and a half later that I discovered that May 23rd is one of 2 or 3 days that they celebrate in France the arrival of Mary Magdalene.
That's right. That's right.
And how could my vision have happened on that date when I had no prior knowledge of this sacred date? It shows you how real it really is, how it's not just your imagination. And there are some components of this vision that I finally figured out the meaning of, which I'll go into. So what had happened on that morning, I woke up and I was in tears for what I had experienced in this vision.
Well, let me ask you something before we start that. Did you have any connection to Mary Magdalene before?
Oh, yeah, because, the first vision of Mary Magdalene occurred. So I had regular encounters with Christ and the mother of Christ that started in 1994. And the first vision of Christ was October of 1994 during a severe rainstorm. My company, my environmental eco venture capital company called Green and Blue Corporation, went bankrupt, and I had this BMW parked in the mud during these rainstorms at my dad's and his wife's ranch in Topanga Canyon, and they were renovating their house. There was nowhere for me to live, and I had gone tree planting that year, and the government stole all of my earnings for the entire year out of my bank. And I was physically exhausted from 6 months of planting trees, planting probably 50, 60,000 trees in the mountains of British Columbia. And there I was in Topanga, California, and my tent was flooded and torrential rains. I was getting hypothermia. And I remember I had my briefcase in the tent, and all my papers were soaking wet. The water level was rising because I had pitched my tent in a gully. And suddenly I left my body. And it's an amazing sensation when you really leave your body. You're not having a dream. There's this huge electrical discharge upon the moment of leaving the body. And I went above the oak tree in the yard, and I could see I was out of body. And this giant crucifix made of granite appeared above the trees. And this granite was vibrating a sound, a very sacred sound. And the sound was calling me to come forward, and I came near the cross. It was probably somewhere around the height of the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem. Probably a true Holy of Holies correct measurement would be 34.34 feet. And I never thought of that until later. And there was this, baptismal water shaped in the form of a cross beneath it. And I fell into the water in the Spirit, and I was baptized in all of the suffering in my soul, which was enormous pain at that time in my life, because I had been alone for years in no relationships, and I felt that life on earth was like, I was working so hard to do my part of planting all these trees, and I was being abused by my government, and I just really didn't want to live. And so the moment I was out of body, I was like, great, I'm dead. I froze to death and I'm out of here. And once I fell into the pool, I was carried above the rain clouds, and the carrying was like a mother energy. It was like the feeling a child gets when its mother picks it up, and the child is fully surrendered, and it doesn't have any ability to move around on its own because it's an infant. And the feeling was like being an infant, like being carried by the mother hands of God upward, upward, upward. And in that moment, I was above the sun hadn't yet risen. It was still dark. There was a glow on the horizon, and suddenly millions of tiny little diamonds of light, like as big as atoms, billions and billions of them came from every direction, above, below, behind, beneath, and rushed together. And it was like the sound of the Big Bang. It was a deafening cosmic bang. And suddenly the body of Christ in the highest appeared in front of me. And you have to understand, Christ in the highest is not the same as the person people call Jesus who walked on the ground.
That's right.
It's blinding. It's impossible to stand up. I collapsed and fell on the ground, fell at the feet of Christ. And I look at his face and, oh my God, he's too holy, too powerful, too blinding. The levels of love, ecstasy, peace, power, beauty, wisdom, and the graces coming off of the true body of the Christ make ecstasy and love look boring. I cannot even describe what they're like. And
people compare it, they want to talk about bliss, they want to talk about, Kundalini rising, they want to talk about all this stuff, but it's true, it's not, there's no comparison.
There's something way beyond that. Yeah. And when I get to when I get to the encounter with Magdalene, that's what happens. But that's coming up. So what happens is he starts teaching me, and the first thing he teaches me, I would look at his face and look down. Oh my God, you can't look. It's too holy. It's a human cannot survive a direct gaze. And this is really important because in the Gospel of Judas, which was discovered, it's not that long ago that the National Geographic Channel did this special on the Gospel of Judas. And the Gospel of Judas was not part of the Nag Hammadi Library findings in 1945. It was a separate finding.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Gospel of Judas, Jesus tells all the disciples, not one of you dare look at me and survive. So the interpretation by scholars of that is he's being authoritarian, and he's saying that shame on you, don't look at me kind of thing. You're not holy enough. But that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is you won't actually be able to do it, because when he transfigures and reveals the true Christ, which is hidden from the plain view of the masses and the people who would walk by this person every day on the street, that when he transfigures to reveal the true Christ, no one could survive a direct look. So none of the disciples look in the Gospel of Judas. And he tells Judas that only you basically could look. And so Judas looks, and Jesus tells him what's going to pass, that he's going to be turning him in. And that Judas has this vision, which includes 7 stars, which either is Pleiades or it's the Big Dipper, right? And it's debatable about those. And then he shows him this green mansion and these places in the heavens that no mortal eyes will ever encounter, he tells him. That no human could ever dream of going there. And Judas is able to see beyond the scope of the vision of the other disciples in this moment that he gazes into Christ's eyes for just a flash. He looks in his eyes and then he looks down. And that's what I was experiencing. You could use all of your might and you would not be able to do it. And because in this form, if we look at also, there are several transfigurations. There's one transfiguration known as the famous transfiguration in Matthew, the book of Matthew, where Jesus starts blazing like the sun on the mountain, and all the disciples fall as if dead to the ground, and they can't look. And Moses and Elijah appear at Christ's side, right? So you have, in the Gnostic Gospels, you have multiple transfiguration scenes.
Right.
That confirm and reconfirm that he would do this from time to time.
There's a moment where Mary Magdalene is waiting for Yeshua, and he's come out of his regular body. He's in his light body, and but he's halfway in between. So he tells her, he says, "Do not hold on to me, because what I sense is this." He's now in that process of ascension, in that process of where you're saying it is so luminous that he cannot be looked at. However, he did say that she was the only one able to see him.
And she's the first. So she's the first to see him in his true Christed form.
Right.
And that's when he says, "Don't touch me," because he hasn't ascended to the Father yet. And it's interesting because today there are scientists that have done tests on the human aura of the body, and they found at the moment of death, the brain stays alive for 3 days. Right. And this is after death. They've actually electronically measured this. And at the end of the third day, the human spirit leaves the body. And remember, he said 3 days.
That's right. So consciousness can still remain.
It still remains, because we basically have to move through the lower levels and clear out all of the trauma. See, there's so much trauma just to be a human being. There's so much trauma to be in this brain and nervous system, because there's physical trauma, emotional trauma. Many humans are forced to do something for a living they can't stand because they have to be part of a money system. So there's this enormous violation to the spirit that has to be released in order to go into the heavens. And the life in the heavens, which again, Christ took me through the 7 levels of heaven, which is really God, because at the time that happened in that vision, there was no Jesus in that vision that happened in 1986. And I think I mentioned that in the last interview we did. You did. But what happens now is that, I had 3 of those super blinding visions of Christ, and actually in the second one, because I can't describe the whole thing, it would only happen in Topanga Canyon. I eventually built a yurt on my dad's property, so that when I was there 6 months of the year, I would stay in the yurt. And those visions would only occur in the yurt.
I feel like you were called to build the yurt so that you would have these visitations.
Yeah, the membrane, like when you go into a house, you have all these materials in the walls. You have electrical wiring that actually can trap the astral form and into the body. In fact, it was in the Out-of-Body Institute of Robert Monroe, where Monroe did this experiment, and he had these sleeping chambers for the out-of-body experiments. And when they put electricity through this cage at certain frequencies that surrounded his sleeping area, and this was a man who could leave his body at will. He was unbelievably good at it. And he said he couldn't get out. When the electricity was going through the wiring in the cage, he couldn't get out. And your house is essentially that. Now you have Wi-Fi, you have 60 hertz pulsing through all the wiring in all the house. Yeah. So my experiences were happening in the yurt where there was simply no electricity.
That's right.
And there was a lot of visions that occurred in that giant. My ceilings must have been 12 feet. They're really high. Mm. And I had fabric mesh windows. You build a yurt on a deck. It was overlooking the valley in Topanga, where there is the Inn of the Seventh Ray, which is a very famous spiritual bookstore and restaurant complex, which was right behind me. And there's a little church in the valley right across from where the horses were, because my dad's wife had 3 horses there. And it was a very special spot for years, because I would go tree planting in Canada and be exhausted and come back. And then I worked on landmines and nuclear fusion with this nuclear physicist named Bogdan Magdalne. And I did a lot of other interesting things in Los Angeles for half the year, and then I would go back. And so years would pass, right, between these experiences. And it was when we, moved to Sedona, Arizona, and we had our first daughter, Adira, in 2010. And we eventually moved to Canada, I think in 2003. We moved back to Canada and had our second daughter. And the children were enormously perceptive at the same time these experiences occurred. Let's see, just before the vision of Magdalene, there was an experience in this house we were renting in Nelson, BC, where Astaria, our second, was just a year old. And one morning, I was in the middle of a dream, and all of a sudden, it was like static electricity took over, and the Holy Spirit, literally as the white dove, appeared with this rainbow of light around it. It just blinded me with the vibration of God. There's no way to describe it, because all of those qualities is the innocence, the love, the ecstasy, the peace, the power, the beauty, the wisdom, and the graces were all present simultaneously, as if the Spirit of God was actually the bird. That, remember, when Christ's mission began, the man Jesus was no longer the same, and the Holy Spirit appears as a dove, and the Holy Spirit as a dove speaks and says, this is my beloved Son. And everybody knows the famous words the moment Jesus starts baptizing. He comes upon John the Baptist, and John the Baptist is considered a fully realized master,
right,
of the Holy Spirit of God in the ancient Jewish tradition. And he's baptizing people on his own. And then when Jesus comes upon the scene, the dove appears in the sky above. And what ends up happening the moment the dove appears is my daughter Lyra wakes up, and she's only 4. And she says, Daddy, I saw this bird in her dream. And her bird was golden light, and my bird was pure white light, but it had the rainbow around it. Now, what starts happening in the following weeks is I would be vacuuming or doing house cleaning or whatever, and all of a sudden there was so much ecstasy, so much love, it would overtake me, and I have to stop what I was doing, sit down and meditate. And the levels of ecstasy were so blinding inside of me, this enormous envelope of white light, truly about 34.34 feet wide, the Holy of Holies wide, would it just envelop me. And this went on for over a year, where I couldn't physically do stuff in the house because of how intense this overtaking was. And then May 23rd comes along, and that's the very next spring.
Right.
And this vision begins.
And where were you at this point?
What's that?
Where were you? You were in Canada.
We were in the same house in Nelson, British Columbia, where the Holy Spirit came.
Okay.
To both my daughter Adira and I. And what ends up happening in this dream is really amazing how dreams start, because they start out, they're very abstract. And Shirley MacLaine appears in this dream. And, we've done interviews together on her radio show many times. And she appears and she introduces me to this trail at the base of this, mountain. And the geography of the trail would match either southern France or Spain. And I know that she wrote this book, which I read years ago, called The Camino, which is about this trail that pilgrims go on, this huge hike that
Yes, in
takes them many,
Spain.
many days. But that's actually in Spain.
Yes.
And so she introduces me to the trail, and I go up the trail, and she's gone. And all of a sudden, I'm in this community in the mountains, either in southern France or Spain, is where I figure it is. I would have to go there, like, to see the mountains to know where it was. And I see there's a village of worshipers in this lower valley to Mary Magdalene, I'm told. And they have these concave mirrors, these shiny metallic mirrors, and they signal the second mesa and then the third mesa above them, and they're all cave communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the cave communities, I go up into them, and there's so much wealth in the caves. It took me years to figure this part out, why people who live in caves would have so much jewelry and silver and gold. And in one of the caves, I can see the menorah. Now, this is very important because it's taken me years to figure this out. When Christ is crucified and he said this, the temple will fall in 3 days, it took by 70 AD. Well, first of all, there's the lightning strike, and inside of the Holy of Holies, which is the cube in Solomon's temple where the Ark of the Covenant is stored. But the Holy of Holies itself is so significant, so massively significant, that in the Gospel of Philip, Jesus declares himself the Son of the Holy of Holies because his mother, according to the infancy Gospel of James, at the age of 3, was raised inside of the temple. And she would have been the only female who would have ever been inside the Holy of Holies at that time. And so what happens, the significance of this is that at the time of the fall of the temple, Solomon's treasure, which they say today would be worth more than Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos combined, if you could find it. I'm talking big sapphires, gold, rubies, emeralds, unimaginable amounts of gold and silver. And I'm seeing this in the caves, in the vision. And it's a community of people. The people in the second mesa, basically, when they see the mirror flashing them up, they then flash the third mesa. And each of these mesas, the people living there are at different levels of spiritual development, who are worshipers of the Magdalene. And this would have been before France was formed by an incredibly long period of time. At that time, it's a territory under the Romans called Gaul. So in my vision, the Romans were coming in and they were looking, and it took me years to figure out, what are they looking for? They're not interested in Mary Magdalene. They're interested in the treasure, Solomon's treasure, because it's unmatchable anywhere in the world except for the Queen of Sheba, which is another story. But so basically, when they flash the people in the upper mesa flashes the people in the valley because they can see the Romans coming. And then everybody changes the icons of Mary Magdalene to the Virgin Mary.
Right.
And see, by 500 AD, the Roman Catholic Church had formed. And before that, in that interim period between 70 AD, before that, there was the first church at Constantinople was formed, which is the first church, and there were Christian sects that had manuscripts and teachings that were moving all over the Roman Empire, which would include Gaul, which is France today. But France was not limited. I mean, even Spain was Gaul. Parts of England were Gaul. And there were Celtic wars going on constantly between the Celtic tribes. And so when I go up to the second mesa, I come to the first ritual of the council of women that are guarding Mary Magdalene, her actual self. And there's this council of women, and they see me coming, and they don't trust anybody who is new. they don't assume that just because you're here that you should be here, because what they know, the Romans are coming, and they're coming for the treasure. The treasure's in all the caves where all of them live. And Mary Magdalene is enormously powerful spiritually and wealthy. And they basically do this thing where they roll out this scroll and they ask me to read from the book of Mary Magdalene. And as I read it out loud in the vision, and I look at these women, and their dresses are Celtic. These are Celtic, long dresses, long sleeves. And the dresses are so long they go way past the feet. So none of these women, and they're all floating in the air. They're levitating. The whole council of women are levitating. And they don't know if they can trust me. But all of a sudden, and I'm just going by memory, and I made a recording of this, I go to the third mesa, and it's very interesting when I'm going up, I'm climbing up to the third mesa, which is where the highest disciples of Mary Magdalene are. And I go through this experience where it's a very, very personal experience, because it involves a decision that in that lifetime, the woman that I thought I wanted to marry realizes that she has a choice. She can marry a rich man who is a prince in royalty, or she can marry me. And she chooses to actually marry the prince. And she realizes that my vision is non-material, and I'm only in, to go to the third mesa, you have to conquer all of these desires. And even though there's all these riches in the caves, those are insignificant. Those are for the building of the new world. And there's this ritual where suddenly the waters well up from the ground, and the waters contain the Holy Spirit, but it's actually Mary Magdalene who's doing it. She wills up the waters, and everybody runs to drink the water, because the water raises your vibration into this holy, holy state and heals you of your emotional wounds. But the water is the feminine. It's Mary Magdalene. It is her.
That's right.
And it's very possible she had the Ark of the Covenant. Because as I'm reading the Ethiopian Book of Kings, which is called the Kebra Nagast, they refer to the Ark of the Covenant as Zion, the mother. The Ark of the Covenant is feminine because the Holy of Holies, in the Holy of Holies, the Shekinah, which is the feminine aspect of God, would emerge as a blinding flame in the midst of a cloud inside of the Holy of Holies cube, which is surrounded by Solomon's temple. And inside of the cube of the Holy of Holies, the Shekinah would manifest, and it would blind anybody who tried to look at it. So the priest would have to be veiled, the women would have to be veiled to come anywhere near it. So there I was, and the water, everybody knows it. They're all drinking the water, but nobody is at the third mesa yet. These are all people in the second mesa. So when I finally make it to the third mesa, and I'm introduced to a tunnel in the center of the mountain, and I have to crawl on my knees. I can't raise my head in this tunnel. And I come to this chamber in the middle of the mountain, and there's Mary Magdalene. And oh my God, I'm crying my eyes out. As soon as I look at her, there's so much love. There's so much golden light coming off of her. My God, it's blinding. And she looks at me and she cries 3 times. I am co-redemptrix. I am co-redemptrix. I am co-redemptrix. And you have to understand, the mother of Christ in the Catholic tradition is co-redeemer of sins. And she was ripped off. She was the co-redemptrix because she's his wife. All the icons in France were her. Yes. And the Catholics came long after she passed, and they stole them and converted them into the image of the Mother of Christ as co-redemptrix. She was the co-redemptrix because She radiates so much love, so much love. I'm feeling it right now as I speak, and you can't contain it. You can't contain it. And I looked in her eyes, completely merging with all of her love, and it's endless. You realize you're in the presence of a complete master all on her own. There's a quality in the feminine that is not in the masculine. In my second meeting with Christ, I was able to stand up, put my arms up at my side, and look at him for a full minute before I collapsed in tears to the ground and shaking and trembling when I woke up from that vision in Topanga in my yurt. But when you look into the heart of Mary Magdalene and stand up and you look at her, it's the same. But there's a feminine quality that Christ himself does not have. He doesn't have this. And she commanded the waters to well up. Now, and everyone drank the waters. Now we know from the story of Bernadette of Lourdes in Lourdes, France, that this well, the spring emerged from the ground because the visions of Bernadette told her where to go. And when the water welled up in France, people went and drank the water and they got cured of diseases and physical ailments. But what she was showing me is she was in command of the mountain. She could tell the springs to come up. It was Mary Magdalene who was doing it. And she was the mother. She was the Shekinah. She was the Shekinah is very powerful because when I went to this discovery in the National Geographic magazine of the discovery at the village of Migdal, where they found the small rectangular box that had the menorah on the side of it and the flower of life, the 6-petal, flower of life. There were measurements to a cubic building, and this is in Mary Magdalene's village. And the researchers didn't even notice those are the measurements of the Holy of Holies, because the outer wall was somewhere around 37 feet, which would allow you, with the thickness of the stones on both sides, to have a 34.34 foot cube, which would have been a perfect Holy of Holies. So if Mary Magdalene had her own Holy of Holies in the village of Migdal, and you go to the Gospel of Philip and you see this, that Jesus says in Philip, there are 3 temples in Jerusalem, the Holy of the Holy, and the Holy of the Holies. And that he is the son of the Holy of Holies because his mother was raised in it, and that is where the Shekinah manifests. Mary Magdalene would have had her own Holy of Holies because those are the correct measurements. And there's her Ark of the Covenant made of stone sitting there, and they don't even realize, the researchers today, what that rectangular stone box is.
Right.
That's her Ark of the Covenant, which went inside of her Holy of Holies, where Shekinah would manifest. And that's, you see, in Philip.
Can you tell us the measurements of the Holy of Holies?
The Holy of Holies is really amazing. So you have to go into this journey to find the true cubit of God.
Yes.
And it's in the book of Ezekiel, which is about 500 years before Christ, thereabouts. It's 500 and something years. In the vision of Ezekiel, see, there are 3 levels of the Jewish temples with the Holy of Holies. And the first level, when the Jews were nomadic, they would set up the holy tabernacle, which was a tent of fabric with the correct measurements. The length and the breadth and the height thereof are measured in cubits. And then inside of that, there's the Holy of Holies is 20 by 20 by 20 cubits. Now the problem is, in the book of Ezekiel, God doesn't use the standard cubit, which most Jews use today. They're all wrong. He's saying a cubit is a cubit and a handbreadth, and a cubit and a handbreadth is a royal cubit in the Egyptian system, which means you have to go to the Great Pyramid's measurements to know what a royal cubit is. And what's really amazing is when I discovered, which took me years to figure out, so many people have a theory of what the cubit is in inches, because the earliest measurement in the history of that region of Babylonia and the Middle East was the inch. And the inch is based on, the index. If I take my index finger right now, and I take my ruler, the last joint on my index finger is an inch.
Hold on, Dave, can't hear you that well.
The last, my daughter's having a bath and she's screaming in the background, but because she's getting her hair washed. But anyway, an inch is based on the last joint of the index finger, right? So the royal cubit is measured in inches. And even though different Egyptologists have different measurements, they found 2 or 3 rulers only in the excavations. And they ranged between 20.6 and 20.8 point something inches per cubit. And the fact that the rulers vary slightly is because the Egyptians themselves did not know what the correct royal cubit inch was. But I decoded it. It took me some years, and it comes to 20.605 inches per royal cubit, which is the cubit of God. And with that number, you take the length of Noah's Ark. This is the boat and the prophet Noah.
Yes.
And it comes to 515.125 feet, which is 5151, which is the Great Pyramid number. The sacred angle of the Great Pyramid is 51 degrees and 51 minutes. And this gets really, really deep. Okay, so you'll see this actually in this discovery in Jerusalem, where they found what they believed was the family burial plot of Christ and the whole family. You'll see this triangle, and nobody measured it. So I took a photograph of it and I did the angle measurements, and it's 51 degrees and 51 minutes, and that's the Great Pyramid. Nobody noticed.
Right.
And in fact, James Cameron did a whole documentary on it and didn't even notice that is Great Pyramid sacred angle. So Noah's Ark comes to 515.125 feet. The Ark of the Covenant comes to 51.5125 inches. The height of Solomon's Temple comes to 51.5125 feet. And they didn't have feet back then, by the way. So you'll always see the 515125. And the length of the staff of Aaron and Moses, which lay in the Ark, is 51.5125. And so when you come to the measurement of the Holy of Holies, using the 20.605 inch royal cubit, now this is very important. This is very important because when I say Noah's Ark comes to 515125 feet, there's an archaeologist named James Wyatt. And this data just came to me in the past couple of months. Somebody sent it to me and they said, David, according to James Wyatt, the skeletal remains of Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat are 515 feet. And they wouldn't see the 0.125 because they're using a measuring tape. You need a laser to see that last final digital number. I mean, you don't understand. If you're using the regular cubit, you're way less than 515 feet for Noah's Ark. It's only 18 inches, right? The standard cubit. So most people, when James Wyatt found the skeletal remains of Noah's Ark, missed it because they were looking for a smaller boat because they're using the wrong cubit. That proves that Noah's Ark was built with the cubit that I discovered. Exactly. Which means the Holy of Holies is 34.34 feet. Now, but the most amazing thing is that this is really shocking what I'm about to tell you, because remember, at the entrance to the family burial plot, it's in James Cameron's documentary, is this triangle, which is 51 degrees and 51 minutes. Now, this is shocking because that symbolizes the Great Pyramid. 515125 is everywhere in the sacred measurements of God in the Holy of Holies, everywhere. So when you take, before I reveal this iconoclastic information, when you take the radius of the Holy of Holies, which is, you take a circle in the center of the Holy of Holies and calculate the radius, it's 17.17 feet. Now, if you come to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where they mark the spot of the birthplace of Christ, you'll see the number 17.17 stamped on the 14 pointed star. On the 14 pointed star. And most people don't know what that means. They're not getting it. They think it's a date. But that's the radius of the Holy of Holies. And the birth, and remember, Christ in Philip is the incarnation of the Holy of Holies. He's saying, I'm the son of the Holy of Holies, which is the bridal chamber. The bridal chamber referred to in the canonized Gospels is the Holy of Holies, because he confirms that in Philip. So when you measure the Holy of Holies in inches, it's 412.1. Well, guess what the most common measurement in the Great Pyramid is? The 4121, 41.21 inches is 2 royal cubits. Half of that is 20.605 inches per cubit. There it is. It was staring at us all the time, the correct number of inches per royal cubit, and which is 20.605 inches. And when you use the 20.605 inches, the radius of the Holy of Holies is 17.17 feet. It's 34.34 feet across. 412.1 inches is the same number as the most common measurement in the Great Pyramid, expressed as 2 royal cubits, except the decimals just moved over one place, but they're the same exact numbers, 4121, which again ties the Great Pyramid to the Holy of Holies and everything God measured. Noah's Ark, 515.125 feet long. The staff of Aaron and Moses and the 12 tribes, 51.5125 inches long. The height of Solomon's temple, 51.5125 inches long. But now this gets even more astounding. When you come to the king and queen's chamber in the Great Pyramid, remember Jesus said in Philip, there are 3 chambers of initiation. The Holy, the Holy of the Holy, and the Holy of the Holies. He says you attain the resurrection before you die in those 3 chambers. And those 3 chambers are the secret to the resurrection. He says in Philip, if you don't attain the resurrection when you live, when you die, you'll receive nothing. So the scholars changed that. They had to change the translation. So the new translation is not as extreme as that when you read Philip today. Because when you read Philip 5 years ago, that's what it said. And it was so terrifying to Christians to realize if you don't attain the resurrection, what does that mean? It means Jesus attained the resurrection while he lived. Well, guess where he did it? Guess how long the king's chamber is in the Great Pyramid? 412.1 inches. That's the Holy of Holies, precisely to 1/10 of an inch accuracy. Guess how wide the king's chamber is? It's the radius of the Holy of Holies, 17.17 feet. Guess how wide the queen's chamber is? 17.17 feet.
My lucky number, 17.
So those are the chambers of attaining resurrection, which is where Isis and Osiris, you understand, they attained resurrection status before Christ was even born.
Right.
The status of attaining resurrection existed way before him, and it existed inside the Great Pyramid. There's 3 chambers of initiation in the pyramid. There's the chamber below, the subterranean chamber. There's the queen's chamber and the king's chamber.
Right.
See? So
these numbers.
So Jerusalem copied it. God's measurements in Jerusalem are the same. The Holy of Holies is exactly the same as the length of the king's chamber. And the width is the radius. So what does that mean? It means there's a frequency that gets activated inside of that very, very densely protected chamber. And I've calculated exactly the frequency of the Holy of Holies. And the staff of Moses, and I've calculated actually the frequency of the staff of Ezekiel, because we know in the Bible that when the angel comes in Ezekiel, he's holding a 6-cubit staff, which would come to approximately 10.3 feet. And if you have you see the staff of Moses at 51.5125, and we sell these on my website. People are buying these beautiful gemmed staffs that we make that are this precise measurement, and they plug in and they transmit the frequencies into your meditation space in your body. So for the benefit of you getting activated at these sacred holy of holies frequencies today. So what this means is that the Great Pyramid of Egypt is not the Great Pyramid of Egypt. It's the missing pillar to the Lord in the book of Isaiah in the land of Jesus, in the land of Egypt. And that the Egyptian people found the pyramid and basically formed a community and eventually a civilization around it. But it is the missing temple to the Lord in Isaiah, probably pre-flood of Noah time period.
Well, you
His
know,
measurements.
this past summer, I went to Egypt and I was in the Great Pyramid and I also laid in the King's Chamber. And when I laid there, where it took me, my consciousness was beyond what I could imagine, but it's very difficult to describe. It's like you're going into the deepest depths of yourself where there's nothing. It's like a great void of nothingness. And to me, that's like the Father, right? The Father energy, that void.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't get to go into the Queen's Chamber, which I feel like it's to be saved for another time. But that's that's the mother energy, and that mother energy is the manifest. And so I understand now where you're going with this, and it makes perfect sense to me. But I also connected when I was up in the King's Chamber. I was connecting to Sirius, star Sirius, so that I feel like these codes are brought down to humanity from ancient Sirius and brought down to humanity so that we can activate those codes, because my feeling is that humanity is from Sirius and that we're just
I think there's see what I've done in the last year, because when you read, for example, Dante, when you go through the Paradiso and you go through his 9 levels of heaven, you realize where he's taking you. The first level of heaven is earth. So earth has a hidden dimension that is actually the heaven of earth. And in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says the first heaven is like a scroll rolled out in front of you, but you don't see it. Right here on earth, there is a dimension of heaven. But then he goes to Mars, then Venus, and Venus is the third heaven in Dante's vision, where everybody is like the Garden of Eden. They're all naked and they have perfect bodies. So there's no, people walking around that envy one person's nude body over the other, because they're all beautiful. But he doesn't stop there. Dante goes to the fourth and the fifth and the sixth and the seventh. And the seventh, I think, is the planet Jupiter. Oh, Saturn. It's either I think it's Saturn. And then after Saturn, he turns to the fixed stars. This is the point of Sirius and Pleiades. And he's saying that the higher heavens beyond the seventh are among the star groups. And is there a connection between the Holy of Holies and a specific star? And this is really, really wild what I've done in the last year. I have taken the radius of over 50 known stars and calculated their frequencies. So you take the speed of light in inches divided by the circumference of inches of the star, and then I calculate the octaves of the star using the golden ratio as an octave. And I come upon a certain circumference. And then I say, which temple on earth does that temple, which star is in a perfect octave of? And you're not going to believe this. The Holy of Holies has two, out of 50 known stars, has 2 contenders. And one of them is Sirius, and the other is Vega, which was the North Star during the time of the biblical prophets. Right now, the North Star is Polaris, but at that time it was Vega. But they're both contenders because none of the other stars came anywhere near the perfect circumference. So you imagine the circumference of the temple inner sanctum has to be an octave of a certain star. And I was amazed also to find that there was a sacred stone circle in England that was an absolute perfect octave of Sirius A. There was
Mm,
no other star in my list of calculations that came close.
right.
So that means that the temple of the Holy of Holies is a is an octave of a star. And the star is a star gate. So this is where we think of stargates as gateways to the star. But
This,
our
the star,
bodies are
yeah.
made of stardust, right? We're made of the product of the fusion of all of the materials that are sitting inside of our bodies.
Well,
And
the star is actually a state of consciousness.
it's a state of consciousness, exactly. And I have those, I have the each star, I have scaled the octaves all the way to audible. So I have 15 audible tones for Sirius A now, which you can listen to in meditation to attune to that star. I have 15 audible tones as octaves of the star Vega. I have 15 audible tones of any star you can think of because I've calculated all of them. And they're the most beautiful, smooth, beautiful tones. And they're very precise to 10 decimals of accuracy. So it's really amazing to think of. Remember, Dante, when if you imagine what Pythagoras said, that when we die, we will find that all of the planets in our solar system are inhabited by spiritual beings. And each planet is a frequency wavelength, just like Earth has a frequency of 7.83 hertz, which is the theta part of the human brain, which is exactly where we dream. We dream at the frequency of our own planet. So when we die, do we have lessons on each of the planets? And then eventually we reach the level that we can leap past our star system and start traveling to the other stars in the constellations, because each star is a frequency lesson that
That's
we're going to eventually master.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
funny because I went to so right after my Kundalini awakening, I was I had two tall beings come into my room. I've told you this before, David, and
Mhm.
they were from Sirius, and they took me up. And the only thing I could remember was going. Wait, they were. It was a diamond shape with a platform in the middle, and
Right.
these two and beings were waiting for me there, and it felt like I was going into another state of consciousness. And the only words that I came back with that that morning was higher consciousness. Mind you, I did not know what that meant at that time.
That
So
time, you're right.
I was
It's
completely
a
new at that.
huge journey when you have an awakening like you had. It takes you years. Like it took me years to figure out what all the treasure was doing in the caves in the menorah. What was the menorah there? Well, the menorah was in the Holy of Holies. So that would have been proof that Mary
Yes.
Magdalene.
Yeah, so it's a puzzle piece. You know, you're putting a puzzle piece together. But now, going back to your findings, you know, all of this, people don't realize that numerology, and the numbers, the matrix of the numbers that are brought here on Earth is so that they're awakening codes. And once we figure them out, like yourself, David, that we can awaken to the truth. And that basically, it's not about anything else outside of ourselves. It's the truth of ourselves. And
Exactly. And see, we get our frequencies through music. And years ago, this is quite a few years ago now, I decoded the entire music scale of the Great Pyramid. And if the Great Pyramid is God's temple, then that's God's music scale of the 10 levels of the angelic kingdom. There's 9 levels of angels, and the 10th is God in the highest. And so you realize that the way we receive frequencies is through music. And music has, our music scale is Pythagorean, which is not perfect. It's slightly out of phase in its ascension, whereas the pyramid tones I discovered are perfect. For example, you take the capstone of the Great Pyramid today, which is 572 point something inches per side, And as a crystal oscillator, you take the speed of light in inches divided by the square of the inches of the capstone, and it's 5.15125 megahertz. 5.15125 megahertz, which is the same number. So how do you get the speed of light in inches divided by that? And we only discovered the speed of light accurately in the 1970s. How did the ancient Egyptian builder of the pyramid know the speed of light divided by the capstone base would produce the same number as the slope angle and the same number as everything God designed?
No, they didn't. They didn't. It
They
was
did
given
it.
to
So
them.
it wasn't Egyptian. These are the same numbers in the Holy of Holies, the staff of Moses, the Ark of the Covenant, the length of Noah's Ark, the height of Solomon's temple, all of it. In fact, it's really amazing. If you take 12 staffs of 51.5125 inches, and there's 12 tribes of Israel, and each holder had a staff. And Jesus said in Mark 6 that when he dispersed the 12, he said, you can forget everything but your staff. You have to have your staff. Why would he say that? Because the staff calibrates you to that frequency. Because this is even more amazing. An antenna, if the staff of Moses and Jesus is an antenna, the height of an antenna as a monopole emitter today is a quarter of a wavelength. Guess what happens if you take the height of Moses' staff at 51.5125, which would be the staff of Jesus and the 12? The wavelength of the staff is the radius of the Holy of Holies, and therefore the width of the king's and the queen's chamber, precisely 17.17 feet.
Wow.
Right? So how does that happen? So you take your calculator. This is amazing. It's taken me years to discover this stuff. So you take 51.5125 inches, and the accuracy of that would be impossible for a person to craft a staff with the human eye. See, the staff of Moses was created by God and given to Adam and Eve when they left the Garden of Eden. And one of the first biblical prophets, I think it was Aaron, sticks it in the ground and it turns into a flowering almond tree. And nobody could pull the staff. Actually, it was stuck into a rock. And Moses pulls it out of the rock. This is where the myth of the sword of King Arthur comes from, pulling the sword from the stone, right? So it's 51.5125 inches times 4, because it's a quarter of a wavelength, which is 206.05 inches divided by 12 inches per foot, or the 12 tribes of Israel, 17.17 feet precisely, which is the width of the king's and the queen's chamber in the pyramid. So there's the staff of Jesus. Says in Mark 6, you cannot leave without your staff. He's saying that. He's saying you can forget your sandals, you can forget everything. Don't forget your staff, because that's how he communicates with them.
Right.
Because when you hold the staff of the correct measurement, and it's made out of the right materials, and it has the 10 sapphires, according to the ancient Jewish manuscripts, because the throne of God was made of sapphire, then your body slowly starts to calibrate at that frequency, and that's the frequency of the Holy of Holies that God is going to keep you in alignment with. So when Jesus disperses the 12 and the 7 women, they have to have staffs. Then they're calibrated. But that, again, the width of the king's and queen's chamber means the staff is emitting a wavelength that is equal to the exact width of the king and queen's chamber. Further proof, mathematically, that the king and queen's chamber in the pyramid, in the Great Pyramid of Egypt, is God's temple.
It's amazing. It's just amazing how it takes all these years to figure that out. Maybe this information was hidden from us, but it's amazing that you found all this information, that you discovered the mystery codes.
Well, now you can actually get initiated into the staff. If you go to the staffofmoses.com, we have different levels of the staffs available today on the site, and this is a site run by one of my companies, so that people can learn to meditate with these and get the sapphire energy in your system. And these plug into a frequency generator. Then you hold them during meditation, and then you leave them on when they're in the house and they're transmitting. And they're so the staff of Moses.com, where people can check those out.
Hold on. Dog's barking. Okay. Kids crying, dogs barking. Okay.
I mean, we actually have had people get them with really expensive sapphires put into them, and I won't say how valuable those are, but they're immensely valuable.
Right.
I believe, according to the Jewish manuscripts, the ancient Hebrew manuscripts, the staff of Moses had the 10 sapphires. I'm trying to find this article here in a second where I have that archived. Where is it? The Legend of the Sapphire Staff. It's treeoflife-teachings.com/legend-sapphire-staff. And it talks about the sapphires
Okay.
in the staff. So why we use the sapphires. And the sapphires are emitting frequencies. They're very powerful. They're a very, very powerful gem. And, we make them with lab-grown perfect sapphires. NASA uses lab-grown sapphires in what are called masers, which allow radio astronomers to open up the microwave bands of the universe and for radio astronomy. So they're actually used for communication and astronomy. Can you believe that? And only a sapphire and a ruby can do that. But according to the legend, here it is. The story begins in the Garden of Eden with Raziel handing Adam and Eve the sapphire staff that embodies all the teachings from the tree of life. The staff transforms back into a tree in Jethro's garden and again changes into the staff of Moses to carry with him on his journey of destiny. But Moses actually pulls it from the rock. And just like King Arthur pulls the sword of Excalibur from the rock. According to the legend, the sapphire staff is no ordinary staff made of wood, but an extraordinary staff made of sapphires. And that goes from the ancient teachings of some of the most ancient sources. And I've read every gospel in the Garden of Eden. One gospel says scripture, not a gospel, says it was made of brass. And there's other ones that suggest gold and even silver. So it would be metal because metal is a conductor. And the ideas of wood probably come from, like if you look at Egypt, if you look in ancient Egypt, Isis has her staff, Osiris has his staff, Horus has his staff. They all had staffs.
Yes.
And this is the interesting thing about the angel in Ezekiel holding a 10.3 foot staff would mean he's enormously tall, because 51.5125 inches comes to a perfect height for me to stick my arm straight out and cuff my hands right underneath the head of it. According to the measurement of Jesus's body in this the fabric, the fabric that was Jesus's body was wrapped in and left the impression of his body in. The Shroud of Turin, Jesus measures 72 inches, which is, the number 72 is incredibly sacred because Jesus had the 72 disciples outside of the 12, and Moses and Aaron had 72 perfected elders. The 72 is a very, very sacred number. So what I'm saying is holding out your arm at my height, the same height as Jesus, because my body's the same height as his was. The hand comes out right under the head of the staff, and you can walk with it. Had it been only an 18-inch cubit, Moses would have had to have been a very small man in order to walk with a cubit as small as the regular cubit. But as a 10.3 foot staff would mean this angel would have been somewhere around 11 or 12 feet tall in the book of Ezekiel. And the book of Ezekiel the angel gives the prophet Ezekiel instructions to build the new Holy of Holies, which remains at 20.605 cubits. But instead of putting an Ark of the Covenant inside of the new Holy of Holies, he puts a table before the Lord, which is a very sacred measurement. It's an absolute Great Pyramid measurement. And but that temple, the temple of Ezekiel, was never built. So you had the Jews traveled with the tent, and they set up the tent in the dimensions of the Holy of Holies, and then the Solomon's temple had a bigger tent. And they would set it up and put the ark inside of the tent of the Holy of Holies, which is what the Muslims do today. The Kaaba, the black stone, sits inside of a fabric tent, which the Muslims' measurements are wrong. The Kaaba is not the correct measurement. And the temple becomes solid as Solomon's Temple 1, which gets destroyed, and then eventually you have the next Solomon's Temple gets destroyed, and no one built Ezekiel's temple. It's never been built.
Mm.
And the vision comes before the time of Christ and before the destruction of the second temple in Jerusalem, because Ezekiel knows it's going to be destroyed. But to this day, nobody has built the Holy of Holies.
I see.
They don't exist. And the fact that Christian churches, the inner sanctum is not a Holy of Holies. They don't have a cube in there of the correct measurements. The inner sanctum of a Catholic church is wrong. And it's amazing when you consider the Gospel of Philip. If Jesus is saying, I'm the son of the Holy of Holies, of the bridal chamber, which is the Holy of Holies, and the bridal chamber is the Holy of Holies, why don't we have a cubic core to our churches? Because they rejected the Gospel of Philip. Why would you reject Philip? He's one of the 12. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are only 4 out of 12
That's right.
testifying in the Gospels.
Right. Well, they were rejecting any of the Gospels that actually was telling we were sharing awakening information.
Exactly.
So,
They rejected all of them, and that's because the church was run by evil powers that wanted an all-male hierarchy.
Yes.
And they don't even acknowledge, like, at least in the Keber and the Goth, the Ethiopian Book of Kings, they refer to the Ark of the Covenant as the mother, as feminine.
Mm.
And she is the emitter of Shekinah inside of the Holy of Holies.
That's right.
And there's Mary Magdalene. Now, when I saw her, there's no way to describe the quality of the presence in the center of the mountain where her shrine is hidden to this day. No way to describe it. She's beyond all states of meditation, beyond all of them. There's nothing that compares to the state. There's no, I can reach a supreme state of bliss in my meditations almost every day now. But I can tell you that I can't compare to her.
To that
What she has attained is light years beyond what the great states of samadhi, there's no way to describe it.
Yes.
And recently, holding the staff, I had a vision. See, the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant exists in heaven, and what was on the earth was an earthly copy. But recently, holding the staff at the right frequency, I was able to have a clear vision where I was taken out of the body, and I saw the guards who guard the Holy of Holies and the Ark in heaven. And what those guards experience, just themselves, to be near it, is beyond all states of meditation.
Mm.
And that's their job, to guard the Ark.
Right.
What they experience is beyond it. Like they say during the time of Solomon's temple on the earth, this is in, I'm trying to remember which part of the Bible this is in. It might be in the Book of Kings. You couldn't have any sexual activity of any kind for, I think it was 30 days and walk on the temple grounds. So if you were a common Jew at that time, even if you had sex as a couple, you couldn't come on the temple grounds complex unless you had not had any activity for 30 days. And
Right.
the Virgin Mary would have been, now, no, they're not saying that sex is bad in the ancient, Hebrew manuscripts. That's family life and the procreation of life. But what they're saying is the Holy of Holies is too powerful. You just need to take a break for
Too
30
pure.
days
Yeah.
and cleanse yourself spiritually and physically,
Right.
and then you could walk on the temple grounds.